today. My name is Don Warden. I'll let you guys read my introduction, but I've been in the business for a little over 30 years now. I've been doing all this with cybersecurity for a little over 20. And it's certainly a passion of mine, and I'm excited to be able to talk to you guys about how the attackers are looking at you and what you can do to emulate some of the tactics and techniques that they use to be able to help you be safer. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and move forward. So our agenda for today is pretty straightforward. Why Recon matters, the different types of Recon phases that you'll want to use and attackers often use, some common attacker techniques and signals that you may see within your environments whenever an attacker may be active, some detection and mitigation patterns. I'll run through some prioritization checklists and a playbook. We'll run through a case study, and then last but certainly not least, we'll go through the Q&A for you all. So why does Recon matter? The important thing to note about this is that breaches don't happen overnight. Attackers have to go through and do reconnaissance on your environments, and this takes time. And they also have to have a pretty clear understanding of what the target looks like. So they need to understand what type of subdomains that you might have set up, any kind of misconfigurations that may be out there, software problems. We've seen a lot of software problems with various firewall platforms over the last couple of months that have been used pretty extensively by threat actors. That's how they do this. So they're doing the intelligence gathering. Importantly, if you can detect their recon patterns, then that's going to reduce the dwell time. It's also going to reduce your overall escalation risk that you see. So if you take a look at the Mandiant or the Verizon DBIR reports, they often show that credential abuse and the subsequent lateral movement is something that is clearly detectable. But most people don't understand what those signals look like and what those patterns look like. So we're going to run through some of that today so it becomes a little bit more clear for you. So this is a high-level overview of the recon phases. We have the discovery or the passive recon. So how they go through this is they'll use open source intelligence or OSINT to be able to determine different types of data that's available for the target. They'll also go through combing of public data. So for example, if they're looking to do a phishing or a spear phishing attack, they may go and look at your public website, determine who the high-level executives are. They may use LinkedIn or other types of social media to be able to determine who's an important person and who is someone that they might be able to sneak in on. The second piece of this is the enumeration or the active recon. So that's when they're actually doing the scanning and the probing of your environments using pretty standard tools, honestly. To be able to go and figure out what your environment looks like, where you might have some weak spots. And then lastly, they're going to go through and do validation and do preparation for their weaponization of the payloads. So that's when they'll start doing credential testing and they'll start doing specific targeting. One place that you can look if you use the MITRE ATT&CK framework is to look at T1595, which is active scanning, and T1593, which is gathering the victim network information. Those have very specific pulses that you'll see whenever you have those two events going on, and it's important to have recognition that this is occurring. So the other side of this is passive recon, and it's fairly stealthy because it takes all those public data points or the OSINT that's available out there, and they go through and use that. So for example, if you're trying to think like a hacker, you might want to use open source tools like Shodan, Census, Hunter.io to go through and do self-assessments. If when you do this, I think you're going to be unpleasantly surprised at what you find out about your own environments, because it's really very simple for an attacker. Let's say they want to go and find all of the open 3389 ports in Los Angeles, to go through and do a query and very quickly determine who has that. For firewalls, it's really very simple. As an example, if they were wanting to target a FortiGate firewall, they could go through and tell it that they want to look for all the Acme certificates that are within a specific zip code or city. So it's really pretty easy for them to go and gather this passive reconnaissance data. And you can do the same. That way you can understand exactly what your risk profile looks like. The other thing that they're going to do is they're going to look for public code leaks and misconfigured repos that are out there. And so, we've seen a lot of that's happening on GitHub right now, where people will go through and they'll have misconfigured repos that are out there, and they'll have code leaks, and the threat actors will utilize that. They'll also look at other types of third-party services that you might be using and what your SaaS footprint looks like. And like I said before, they'll use your employee social media, understand the org structure. One thing that a lot of people don't look at is your different types of certificates that you use. So they'll take a look at your DNS. They'll make sure that you've got your SPF and your DKIM and your DMARC all set up properly on your email. If you don't, then they'll check that off as something that they could utilize to help them with their attacks. So you have to really kind of put yourself into an attacker's mindset using these passive reconnaissance tools, so that you can really understand what's out there. So what are some of those signals that you might see? One of them is new or unexpected subdomains in your CT or certificate transparency logs. So if you don't already have a subscription or you don't utilize CT logging, I would highly encourage you to do that. That way, if you have a threat actor is going through and trying to do a hijack on your domain, this will quickly flag that for you. Another thing to look at is there are tools like DNS Twister that you can use that can help you to determine if there are similar type of domain names. Oftentimes in phishing campaigns, a threat actor will use something that looks very similar. They might use a acrylic or another alphanumeric mnemonic to be able to make it look like an email comes from your domain, when in fact it's not coming from your domain. You'll want to look for any type of unusual DNS record changes that happen. You'll want to go through and find public leaks of your credentials or secrets that are out there. You'll want to look for any type of brand new service registrations, or sometimes, and this is really a big deal nowadays with shadow IT, any type of forgotten SaaS apps that may be out there that are tied to your enterprise. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you're aware of any type of unrecognized external scanning. Any good enterprise or business should go through a regular pattern of making sure that you're doing scanning from an ethical hacker or someone else. But if you see anything that's unrecognized that's happening, then you need to take note of that. So that's where it's important to have the SIM rules or any type of other third-party monitoring that you might use to alert your teams that you've got any of that unrecognized external scanning going on, so you can start to really dig in and figure out what's going on. So then we move to the active reconnaissance phase. So some of the common techniques that they use are port and server scanning. So they'll use something like Nmap, which is readily available in open source, MassScan, Burp Suite. They look for any type of open ports, banner data, like I said, on firewalls, or any type of weak authentication endpoints that you might have out there, like open RDP sessions open to the internet. They can also detect, you can detect it through your firewall, your IDS, your IPS, And you can also implement rate limiting mechanisms that will prevent an attacker from being able to do brute force attacks. So again, take a look at this. They'll use the Shodan and the census endpoint queries. They'll try to do credential stuffing and then brute force attempts. So as long as you've got all of those things feeding into your SIEM or your third-party monitoring tools, that should flag an alert for you that will let you know to be on the lookout that someone is trying to go after your company or your enterprise. So some of those signals that you might see is high rate scanning from external IPs. Oftentimes a threat actor will actually go through, excuse me, and they would have already compromised a virtual private server from what looks like a known good IP address within the country that they might be attacking from. And it'll look like it's benign, that it's coming from, anywhere within, let's say if they're an attacker trying to attack a company within the United States, they might have compromised a virtual private server within Michigan, and you're like, well, what is going on with this? So be on the lookout for a high rate of scanning from those external IPs. Always be on the lookout for any kind of authentication failures that go across many accounts. That is a huge signal. Look at your web servers, see if they're trying to do active reconnaissance on your web servers, and looking for any type of code leaks or breaks within your web server or your backend databases. So look for 401 or 403 spikes. That's a really important signal. And then also any type of repeated requests to uncommon paths. So when I'm talking about that, it's like non-standard ports that you might utilize. A lot of people use uncommon ports to try to obfuscate where they might have entry points into their networks, but just know that that's not a good way to go about it, because an attacker can certainly figure that out very quickly. They'll also go through social engineering reconnaissance. So they'll go through and harvest employee emails. Everybody has emails that are typically out on their websites. So if you are an administrator, I would certainly recommend to marketing or whomever manages your website that you limit the email account usage on your websites, and you get it down to like maybe an info ad or something like that, because attackers go through and they harvest all these, and they'll use those to help them be able to go through and figure out appropriate targets. Also phone numbers. Phone numbers are a big deal right now. We get a lot of phishing accounts that are going on where these threat actors are extremely well versed in doing social engineering, and they'll go through and claim that they're, let's say, the COO, and that they have forgotten their password, and they're creating a sense of urgency for the help desk, and the help desk wants to be helpful, and they'll utilize some of this social engineering recon data to allow them to impersonate that individual and be able to get credentials, etc. And then also they'll do pretext with leaked data as well. So you just need to understand what your overall footprint looks like first and foremost. Once you have an understanding of what that footprint looks like with all those publicly available data, you need to make sure you shrink down your footprint so that you have less available data for an attacker to be able to use, specifically related to social engineering. One often, not thought about is supply chain and other third-party recon. So many breaches will exploit your partners that you have. So it may not be directly targeted towards you, but you may have a connection point with a supply chain or another third-party company that you do with. Some of the larger known, or probably the largest known attack was the SolarWinds attack that happened a couple years ago, where the threat actors were able to go through and do mass compromise of many systems. The Move IT is another one. you need to know exactly where you've got the input and the output of your data, what those integration points look like, and figure out how you're going to do the analysis and integrate all of those data points into your monitoring. Public APIs and other federated trust exposures. Oftentimes within, as Azure, for an example, you may have a B2B tenant that you allow other third parties to have a federated trust with your company. You need to understand how to go and manage and monitor all that. If you do have software that does have public APIs, you need to be aware of who's connecting those APIs, track all those data, et cetera, load that into your SIM. And then monitor your vendors' domains and treat them the same as you would treat your own. So if you see any kind of weird certificate changes that are taking place that you weren't aware of, then you need to probably give them a call and say, hey, did you all change the certificate? Did you all make this subdomain, et cetera? And that may alert them as well, which could save you in the end. So going back to identity recon and the people focus. So attackers would like to map the identities to their credentials and then what their use behavior looks like. So what they may do is they'll go through publicly available password vaults. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there that still use the same password over and over again, and they'll try to grab those credentials and see if they get a cross enumeration in your login portals that you may have out to the public. They can counter by implementing, or you can counter by implementing multi-factor authentication. You can block any type of username enumeration. So for example, within Active Directory, you can block anonymous enumeration of accounts and also of shares within your Active Directory environments. Very, very quick and easy group policy to implement. Highly recommend doing that. And then you can also monitor identity providers for any type of anomalies that are out there. Remote workers and contractors. That is a huge opening. There are a lot of companies, most companies now have remote workers. They also have contractors. Need to make sure that you stay on top of those. When you have remote workers, you need to utilize things like conditional access policies so that you know that you've got a better chance that they're actually working from where they say they're working from, et cetera. Contractor profiling, you need to make sure that you've done background checks on them. Do the same type of profiling on them as you would employees. Make sure that you don't have stale credentials that are out there, and go about it that way. So on the physical recon, don't forget the in real life stuff. So there are a lot of times where the facility details are available on public sources. So you might have mappings of your different types of facilities that are available. Threat actors will use that. They will use tailgating or any type of social engineering at the help desk like we've described before. If you take pictures of your environments, make sure that you mask or blur out any type of equipment serial numbers or actual models of your equipment. Those serial numbers can be utilized to be able to call up vendors and get access to remote management tools. So it's really, really important that, if you are proud of the wiring job that you've done and you want to, put it on LinkedIn, this is a beautiful cable job that we have. Make sure that your serial numbers of your equipment are not shown within those photos if you must put those in a public forum. Make sure that you do implementation of dark web and leak monitoring. So there are many different tools, and I'll go through, I've got a slide of different tools that you can use to do this, but you want to make sure that you do monitoring of any type of leak credentials any type of internal documents that are out there, and use leak aggregation services for early detection. So if you see an uptick or a spike in the leaks for your company, you want to make sure that you take the appropriate action there to get that under control. Make sure that you have integration with threat intel feeds into your SIM, and then make sure that you've got the proper escalation paths in place for any type of leak discovery. And then you want to make sure that you assess the severity and reset your credentials promptly if you do find that those have been compromised. So you want to make sure that you map the attacker goals to discovered assets. So you want to this is where you really want to think like a hacker, right? What is the end goal that an attacker wants to gain from the discovered assets that may be out there right now? So for example, you may have a external web app that has a SSO link which goes to an admin interface, right? That is an extremely high risk situation that you want to make sure that you keep to a minimum. But you want to think like the hacker thinks about how they're going to go and compromise those types of environments that are out there. You want to do a prioritization list of the likelihood and overall impact of those types of external facing systems that you have to keep out on the internet, and make sure that you keep that current. And then you want to trace the potential pivot points and the trust relationships that may be able to be leveraged once they have been able to do a compromise within your system. So this is where you're actively trying to do the threat modeling based upon the attacking that you've done on your own environments. You want to make sure that once you've done all those different detection events that you go through and you change your response playbooks. So, you take a look at the different type of alert sources, and I've given some examples there. Make sure that you have some automated actions that are in place. So quarantine of the IPs, reset tokens, force MFA. A lot of those can be done with your EDR. Some of those things are going to be done with identity and access management solution, et cetera. But always make sure that at the end you've got different types of prioritization for what's required for human actions. So you want to make sure that you do investigation by human if you see something that is that critical that you need to do quarantine of an IP or a reset of a token. Make sure that you have coordination between the teams that are responsible for those activities. And then you do the proper rotation of those different types of key sets. So the hardening controls that you can use to reduce your recon is that you want to make sure that you keep your public attack service to a minimum. So once you've done the determination of all the different scanning using the same tools that an attacker would do, you want to take a look at those and you want to shrink that down to the minimum viable product that you need to be able to allow your company to do business on the internet. You want to make sure that you do hardening of your authentication methods and make sure that you use multi-factor authentication and specifically rate limiting. You want to make sure that you maintain your secrets hygiene. So you want to make sure, what that means is you want to make sure that you rotate your API keys frequently. And then you also want to make sure that you're using a web application firewall and you have those rules in place on your firewall and you're doing geo blocking. So here's a prioritization checklist that you can use. So first you want to go through and inventory your public assets. You want to enable CT and DNS monitoring. They'll allow you to see what's going on. Enforce multi-factor authentication. I cannot say that enough. And your adaptive access that you may have in place. You want to run the OSINT sweeps for any type of exposures. You want to do that frequently. You want to put a catalog together of all these different leaked credentials that you might find through these third-party tools and through your own reconnaissance. And then you want to integrate all those recon signals that we've talked about previously into your SOC playbooks. I would do that at least quarterly. If you're a really high profile target, you probably want to do that on a monthly basis. So here's a case study that we've got for a healthcare provider that I covered a while back. They have been targeted through a spoof domain and then some credential phishing that was used. So real quick, the timeline: the attacker registers a lookalike domain. Like I said, you can use tools like DNS Twister to be able to figure out if someone is trying to do this. This obviously is not the URL of the company. I absolutely would never expose that, but instead of healthcare-portal.com, they use HealthCure. People see that and it looks very similar, so they might be easily redirected to go to the HealthCure versus the healthcare-portal.com. You can see on day 2 the attackers had used certificates, and they had changed some certificates. On the CT logs, an entry came up and showed that there had been a change in there, so that flagged the company. Day 3, the SOC detects a CT alert and they correlate it with the DNS text record change. On day 4, they noticed that there were phishing emails that were sent to both finance and HR users. On day 5, they were able to take down that domain, the healthcure-portal.com. They did password resets, and then they also tightened up their multi-factor authentication usage. On day 7, they determined there was actually no compromise. The attack was blocked pre-breach. So these folks were one of the lucky ones. We see this a lot. There are a lot of different repetitive actions. Attackers know what works and know what doesn't work. They have playbooks just like defenders have playbooks. And this type of activity is something certainly that allows them to be able to get a lot of different positive responses for them. And so they use this over and over again. So key signals to look for was the CT log anomalies, the DNS modifications on those records. They had some phishing simulations that they had set up that utilized some of those various domain changes that matched up, and then they also show within their SIM that they had failed Office 365 logins. So taking all those key signals, getting them into the SIM to do the correlation of all those data was something that was critically important for them and actually stop these attackers dead in their tracks. So the takeaway from this is the early detection prevented the breach, and it led to increased CT monitoring and also to a vendor audit that showed that they had some challenges with some of their external access. So this is not something that you're going to be able to do overnight and just flip a switch on. This is going to take some thought, and this is a real high-level roadmap that you can get to a better place within the next 90 days. So within the next 30 days, you want to make sure that you do the external asset inventory, set up some monitoring, make sure that you have multi-factor authentication. 30 to 60 days, you want to get the SOC integration. So you take all the things that you've learned on the first 30 days, you're going to implement that into your playbooks, and you're going to train your staff on what to do. And then after that, you want to go into different tabletop exercises to do what-if scenarios, etc. And then finally set up the automation to where this is all happening in real time so that you can counter the threat in real time. So here are some resources and tools, like I said. So for the monitoring side, make sure that you have the CT feeds, the DNS monitoring services. You can use Census, Shodan, security trails, etc. Google has mandatory CT logs now that they utilize. On the OSINT feeds, you can look at Have I Been Pawned, Intelligence X, Get Guardian, etc. to see if there's been any type of links. For the visibility, make sure that you utilize your web application firewall, your SIEM tools, any kind of cloud audit logs that are available to you. Make sure those are feeding into your SIEM, your ID provider logs, etc. And then recommended reading for you is to go through the NIST guidance, the MITRE attack mappings for Reconnaissance, and OWASP testing guide, and the MITRE attack navigator. So as I described during the presentation, I would use all types of free OSINT that are out there that are available to use. You could utilize something open source like Maltego to be able to do absolute trace on your own company, get your own Shodan or Census accounts, tie in those APIs into Maltego, and then that'll allow you to be able to very quickly go through and determine where some of those points are. You can also just go directly to their websites and be able to do that. There are tons and tons of different open source intelligence that are available throughout the internet, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it. But those are certainly some pretty easy wins. I would start with Maltego, and that's going to allow you to do a lot of reconnaissance. So they'll just do dumps of different websites that are out there. So some of the passive things, as I mentioned during the presentation, they'll go to your public website. They'll go and let's say they're doing a targeted phishing campaign against an executive within your company. They'll go and try to search through their Facebook, their LinkedIn, their Instagram, all of it. Anything that's out there that's publicly available, that is passive reconnaissance mode that they will utilize. They'll also do the same type of things on your companies. They'll use different types of services that are available to be able to map out the company, something like a Hoover's. They'll go through and use those tools to help them do that type of passive reconnaissance to determine what the composition of your company looks like and likely targets to compromise. So you typically would have to use a paid service to be able to go through and do those kind of correlation on the leaks. There are plenty of different tools that are out there. If you just do a Google search on it for dark web monitoring, there are probably 5 or 10 different companies that do that pretty reliably, that can provide those types of intelligence feeds back into your SIEM, so you can start to see correlations of different types of leak data, et cetera, and be able to do some further analysis on that. But I would just go through and just do a Google search for that, for dark web monitoring, and you'll be able to find a bunch of different things. So for the active reconnaissance tools that could be used, it's just like I said, you're going to be using Mmap, Burp Suite. All these things are open source and available for you to be able to use. Also, active reconnaissance will be used, such as the Shodan and the census data that will show near real time what ports that you have open and available. But Nmap is certainly one of the favorites that we like to use as hackers, to be able to go and do enumeration of different types of open ports that we can use for attacks. That can be used both externally and internally. Certainly, excuse me, only do this to yourself. It's illegal for you to use those tools against other companies. So I'll put that disclaimer out there. You don't want to end up going to jail or being in trouble, but certainly you can do that. That's typically what I use personally. So like I said, you want to look for different types of spikes in activity. It's really important to make sure that you've got your baselines, and I think I've covered that on a previous webinar that I've done. Make sure you've got your baseline activity in play, so that you understand what the typical traffic volumes look like and what the typical port utilizations look like. Also taking a look at the patterns for authentications, what that looks like. Obviously, it's going to be different on different days of the week. Perhaps you see a huge spike on a Monday morning. If you see a huge spike on a Friday evening or a Saturday, let's say, that's probably your sign that there's something abnormal that's going on. So you'll want to make sure that you have the baselines in place. Once you have the baselines identified, then you'll be able to very, very quickly understand what's anomalous activity that's out there. That they're trying to go and enumerate what all the different sites are within your environment, right? So typically you're going to have like your base page. They'll start to look for different types of hidden pages that you may use to do different types of admin activities or even API connections. That's why looking for those different types of 401 and 403s is important because they're actively enumerating, trying to find different entry points into your web services. Context of defense versus the context of offense. So for you, as the end user, the defender, you'll want to use that leak data to see if it actually is something that could be utilized by an attacker. If you see a pattern of different types of leaked data, let's say for a specific individual, then you'll certainly want to make sure that you rotate their credentials, make sure that they've got multi-factor going on. If the leaked credential is an API key, you obviously want to rotate that immediately. If the leak is on a certificate, you want to make sure that you go and refactor those certificates that are leaked. That's how I would use that as a defender. As a hacker, I would use that to try to go and force my way into your environment. Through the methods that I described during the webinar. So you want to use rate limiting to make sure that there are a couple things that you'll want to use that for. Number one, if you've got someone that is trying to do DDoS attacks, and let's say you're not using a Cloudflare or other type of company to be able to prepare you for that, then the rate limiting is going to make sure that it reduces the amount of traffic and where they might use high rate attacks to be able to take down a firewall, right? The other thing is it stops the brute force attacks, or it actually slows down a brute force attack, because let's say you've got rate limiting on a login page to individuals can only use the login page 5 times. If they fail 5 times, then they've got to wait 15 minutes, as an example, before they can go again. That's where rate limiting is going to help you make sure that you slow down the attacking. The biggest change in the before and after AI is the use of AI agents. So in the past, when we were doing attacks, we would have to manually go through all these different steps that I've outlined today. Now it's easy enough to make an AI agent that can go through and do automated reconnaissance work for us. That way we can have a ton of different attacks going on simultaneously. Once we get a positive that comes in, then we can go and dig into it further. So it's really about velocity of the attacks. It allows the speed to increase exponentially, and it allows an attacker to be able to go and go after more targets. It's a huge problem right now because they're just peppering people. If you took a look at your logs right now, you would see that you're probably what looks like an attack like every millisecond, right? That's why it's important to make sure that you understand what baseline looks like. There's all this noise all the time coming in and hitting a firewall, as an example. You want to know what is baseline and what looks abnormal or unusual on the traffic. There are AI tools that are available both for red teamers and for blue teamers that you can use. There are third parties that will go through and, or you could write your own AI. Like I said, you would use the same type of technique that the attacker would use, where you would create an agent that would go through and do a simulation on the attack and do all the different types of scanning and reconnaissance efforts that I've laid out today. For the blue teamer side of things, it's really more about how you've got the integration of the different teams or different tooling across your teams. So as an example, on your XDR, a lot of them claim that they've got artificial intelligence that goes through the actually large language models, not truly artificial intelligence per se, but they're able to look at large data sets that you may not necessarily have access to or be able to do analysis on across the entirety of all their different endpoints that they might manage across the globe. So that piece of it is really nice because it allows you to quickly identify any type of global patterns that they might see or any type of anomalies where you may not have the scale, you may not have the data set to be able to determine whether or not this is actually a spike or not a spike, as an example. There are also different types of SIM tools that have different types of artificial intelligence agents that are built into it that you'll want to get into your SOC playbooks that can help do automation. It's kind of like a SOAR tool on steroids, if you will. It's able to do some identification that's a little bit quicker than a SOAR, because a SOAR is typically like an if then. So it's able to do a little bit more than a SOAR. It's taking it to the next level, and it's allowing you to get as close to on par with an attacker utilizing an AI platform. I still think we're a little behind. I think it's going to catch up, but right now the attackers have the edge on AI. Yeah, so I think that listing of things that you put in there is a really good starting point. What websites that you have that are publicly accessible, any type of APIs that you haven't used, you need to make sure that you know what's coming in and out of your network all the time. You need to have secure DevOps as part of your overall security model so that you understand what your developers have going in and out of your environment. Make sure that you have your CI/CD pipelines integrated into SIM tools so that if they have something that's been poorly configured or misconfigured, that it's able to track those trends and alert you. Mail servers, certainly, both if you still have an internal mail server or if you've got an external mail service that you're utilizing, make sure that you've got all those types of integrations into your SIM tools. DNS, like I mentioned, make sure that you're monitoring your DNS records for any types of changes that may occur that were not expected. Cloud buckets, make sure you've got CloudTrails turned on, etc. Third-party integrations, that's where getting into the supply chain attacks, that's something that you'll want to make sure that you have all that mapped. There's so much data that comes in and out of the enterprise today. Doing the initial enumeration of all those different integration points is a huge task in itself, but it's one that needs to be undertaken. I think a lot of people don't put enough emphasis on doing those types of mappings, or they may go and do that exercise one time and think that's enough, but it's constantly evolving. You may have a brand new tool that gets added to your company for use that you may not necessarily understand what the entry point and exit points look like for the data, what the ports are used, what type of data is going there. Again, that's going to modify what your known baseline looks like. So you need to make sure that you've got really close integration with your application development teams and other teams that have the ability to be able to put applications on your network so that you can keep all that underneath control. I typically use the NIST framework. I think I've got a webinar next month, don't I? to cover a lot of that on playbooks. So if you join me next month for our next session, we'll certainly dig into all that. But I certainly use NIST as a starting point. I think it's very comprehensive. I think it's easily modifiable to specific environments, but it certainly covers off all the bases that everyone should be looking at. Yeah, my closing thought for the day is you've had a little bit of a taste into what a hacker looks for whenever they're trying to break into your environment. And my key takeaway is the best way to stop a hacker is to start thinking like one. You can't defend something that you don't understand what it is. So start thinking more like a hacker, even on your defending.